Mobile Business.
I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
Tackling
First question I'll
some
ask
controversial topics. Some topics we sweep under the rug.
You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God. So we kind of have to stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
Right.
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI. Worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
This is 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year. The Trade and Investment Convention, happening on July 17th to 19th at the Centre of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UETGR North Car Park all days, and NAM Devco on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Bal Roop Group and Bmobile Business.
WESN.
We're back here on Talking Point at WSN, the Continent Capital, late this morning. That's my responsibility. I apologize to the viewing public. Of course, there's a lot to get through today, a lot of content to get through before it cycles out and gets too old. A lot of pertinent discussions still coming out of the weekend that we have not had. One of those topics, we didn't necessarily speak on it too much yesterday because media ambassadors can't necessarily speak to certain things. They're not vested with all the authority to represent King and country as actual ambassadors at least used to have such authority when communications weren't as fast as they are now back in the age of sail. But What am I speaking about? Let's cut to the chase. There's that whole situation with regards to the young lady taking photos in a prom dress or in a dance dress or whatever the term is now. I guess prom apparently is used. Graduation dress, there we go. With a police car. I was under the impression that perhaps the police car was used to transport her, although, you know, I have come to be told that possibly it could have just been wanting to take pictures with the police car, which I personally find to be somewhat strange. That even as a child, I would not go, yes, and when I'm at a formal event, I want to take pictures with my formal clothes in front of a police car. I don't know about that one. You know, that would, but who knows? For some people, I understand, adults, children, teenagers, what have you. This is not something that is too far beyond the norm that it is not understandable. But it does leave the police service open to criticism with regards to the utilization of resources, which they at times complain they don't have enough of, particularly vehicles. And if it was utilized in order to transport people, and this is just one of those things where apparently it is done, but do you want to admit to it being done? When I say it is done in a general sense, right? Because especially like nighttime, and then when somebody calls in, hey, I need a car to go here, I need police for this, whatever. Send a car, send a patrol, send someone to check it out, I heard a noise, we don't have anything available. What do you mean you don't have anything available? Well, we have no cars available. And then you see things like this, it's hard for the public not to start to speculate. You see what they're using the police cars for, boy? And this is one of the things where, I mean, kudos to the commissioner for responding to the situation, saying that he will be looking into it, right? He's asking for patience and prudence. And to be fair, I don't think there's enough to say for sure exactly what the pictures mean. But it shows that she was exiting a marked police vehicle, posing for photos in front of the police SUV with its flashing blue lights. Again, was it just that the police vehicle was there and it was a 5-minute interaction, or was it more than that? And then that has greater implications and further questions to be asked. Because at the end of the day, and this is something that people in public office don't always seem to understand, and here's the unfortunate reality. A private citizen still represents the employer. And police officers are more than just public servants who represent their employer. They are agents of the state with certain levels of authority and responsibilities that essentially makes them, at the very least, semi-public people, especially when they're in uniform and when they are driving a police vehicle. You're not a private individual at that point. You're almost famous at that point. People will take a note of you, especially if you're patrolling a certain neighborhood regularly. And the further up the ranks you are, the higher rank you are, the more public of a person you are. The Commissioner of Police is a very public office. To some extent, there's limitations. There's still some amount of expectations of personal privacy, but there are limitations on that with regards to what you're doing in public office, what you're doing in the execution of your duties. So the unfortunate reality of that is anyone that is even remotely in a position where they are in the public eye understands that I have to be careful not to do things that could be misconstrued as other things. And with social media, and this is one of the things that the TTPS hasn't necessarily caught up to fully yet, because it's not new that you have police officers that want to abuse their authority, that you have police officers that want to take advantage of their position and potentially take liberties with the civilian population. This is not unique to Trinidad and Tobago. This is around the world. But like other things, the fact that everybody don't just have cameras in their hands that could take pictures. It could take video. And it's not just videos of interactions they could take and have for themselves, but they could freely upload it to social media, which is basically self-publishing, that allows for distribution depending on how viral it goes, it could go to everybody in the nation. You don't need to send it to a media house and hope that they decide that it's newsworthy to play. And because of that, the level of exposure of public persons are higher. Now, for some extent, what do politicians do? They just try to avoid it as much as possible. And ironically, to some extent, it's not like we have journalists that hunt down politicians to catch them in unguarded moments. But police interactions, no matter how mundane they may seem, especially when the people who are interacting with police publish it themselves, they're open to public scrutiny. And it could very well be that this is much to do about nothing. But again, officers need to understand the laissez-faire attitude of society. It's a balancing act. I'm not saying that we need to all become stiff, upper lip, proper. Everything has to be formal. Everything has to be structured and ordered. All the soul and life needs to be sucked out of everything. I'm not saying that. But there's a time and a place. And depending, if you're not sure where the line is, then err on the side of caution. Don't do anything that might be risky that could potentially cross the line. Because it's not just if it crosses the line, like I said before. You just need for people to make an assumption that it was bad. It doesn't actually have to be bad. And then you'll end up with the consequences, even if there's much to do about nothing. Now, another unfortunate thing, I don't know to what extent this has actually kind of reached the public consciousness just yet, but apparently under U.S. immigration law, soon we will have to pay, and this is coming from the One Big Beautiful Bill, which I have not followed. I don't necessarily understand the concept of One Big Beautiful Bill and everything that it does. I just know that it was debated, I believe, in the House and potentially Senate of the American government recently. But apparently that also includes an extra $250 US fee on top of the $185 US visa to enter the US. So to some extent, if you're gonna visit the US, this will double the fee. I don't travel to the US that much, right? I've gone to the US a handful of times, like 3. I have no plans to go in any immediate or recent times. So it's, to me, if you're just going very, very once in a while, this isn't that big of a deal. But we have the diaspora, and to some extent, this is a thing. I know that a lot of people like to travel, and I guess there's a difference. We live in the Caribbean. Traveling to other Caribbean islands is not that interesting, but traveling to the States allows for a different experience. Of course, there's always the alternatives, Canada, United Kingdom, but as we have seen, immigration to those areas and visiting those areas have become harder and harder. And I guess part of this, now it's not limited to us, this is not a measure specifically targeted at Trinidad or targeted at nations and situations like Trinidad per se. This seems to just be U.S. immigration law making changes. They're trying to, because of the excesses of previous administration, they are either compensating or overcompensating. We'll have to kind of wait and see to fully determine which one of the two they are. I would at this point lean more on the overcompensation side, but maybe it was that bad with regards to the amount of illegals coming in. For visitors, this is just something that, those who are going to visit the U.S. this year, you'll have to deal with it. And depending on if these fees still exist, I'll have to deal with it. And I'm not going to lie, I don't like it per se. I don't necessarily want to have to pay more if I go to the States. But this is the world we live in. It's their country, not ours. We could only control what happens in our country. And to be honest, when you really look at it, we're not really doing that great of a job at that. So to what extent can we criticize other nations, how they run their nation? We're the ones that want to go there. We don't have a U.S. tourist market. Yeah, we might get U.S. tourists, but we don't actually have a U.S. tourist market where Americans want to come here on a frequent basis, on a regular basis, in large scale. They're right next door. Mediterranean tourist destinations get a lot of European business, but you know, I guess our planning and marketing leaves much to be desired. Now, one of the things to get to is, well, overnight, or last night, I believe, the Prime Minister did speak on this, but we'll go first with the Law Association, because she was responding to the Law Association. They made a comment, and the Prime Minister's rebuttal was essentially what I was thinking. Although I would argue that perhaps she maybe kind of was a bit more aggressive than I would have liked. But the gist of it is simply, it's not as though the Law Association speaks out at all points in time when the public probably wants to hear from the Law Association. Because I can't remember all of the specifics, but I do remember when Talking Points started, there were a few incidents where the Law Association spoke, and ironically, at different points in time for different issues, the PNM and the UNC, you know, had to defend themselves or felt the need to defend themselves by verbally attacking the Law Association. And then at some point, it seems they got the message and they stopped commenting on things that included stuff to do about lawyers and the judiciary, and you're like, where's the Law Association? I can't remember if the Law Association spoke on one of the more controversial appointments to senior counsel, I can't remember. But there were a couple times in the last couple of years where I'm like, Law Association kind of quiet. So now it's very convenient that they're like, let's talk about this now. Now, I don't think the Law Association necessarily has a bias, because like I said, I think within the span of a few months, you had both Dr. Keith Rowley and Kamala Prasad-Bissessar complain about the Law Association. So it makes me wonder if the issue is not that the association has a bias, but rather the association in and of itself either doesn't necessarily know what it wants to be, doesn't necessarily know what it wants to represent, doesn't necessarily have a consensus of how it wants to respond to things. And at the end of this, it seems to be more random than maybe it might appear. And then we have to ask exactly whose agenda is being played out with what communication, and what is the motive for each individual public communication by the Law Association. Because it doesn't seem to be done with any degree of consistency, or at least it's not consistent enough, so that we could see, hey, this is your philosophy as expressed by a consistent pattern of opinion, a consistent pattern on the stances you take, so that we could say, hey, right, this is who they are. They're showing us, and they're not being hypocritical of what they're about, of what ideals and principles they stand for. I'm not entirely sure. Because while I understand, there is parts of the criticisms by certain members of the government / the UNC as a political party, and their criticism of independent senators, which in a vacuum, I understand on principle, yes, you might want to push back against that. But then if you go into the specifics, as I have said before last week, at least one of those independent senators is unfortunately having to carry baggage from previous tenures as an independent senator, with regards to a pattern of behavior that he himself has shown, at least a pattern to some degree, that cannot necessarily be accounted for. And it's reached the point where I think people are not willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And perhaps it could be improved with better communication on this senator's part, or perhaps it can't. That still doesn't necessarily mean that he is biased, but those questions are out there in the public air. And these are not questions that are born from the statements of the government or the UNC, who they themselves spoke of them or gave out the criticisms on his recent decisions. These are questions that have been asked at times preempting his critics. So It's not just because the UNC PRO said something, so all of a sudden people want to see something that's not there. No, we have fielded questions about this senator, not just because of this, but in times past, in issues past. I myself understand the frustration that at least was supported or expressed in support of his colleague by Dr. Kirk Mayo. I can't remember I think it was a senator's name, a government senator. I can't remember which government senator expressed his criticism in that moment. So, I get it. My only thing is, I understand the government wants to point out something that they think is pertinent, maybe not being as aggressive, because the fact of the matter is, if you think this is a legitimate issue to speak about, that you believe that an independent senator is not necessarily acting independent, that's fine. There should be some avenue for you to address things like that, but not necessarily to bring the debate, bring the conversation down into the political gutter, where it's starting to become more of a fight as opposed to debating the issue on the merits of the case. Granted, it's very subjective, so I don't necessarily know how far it could possibly go, but this is for the senator himself to understand that these sentiments are not limited to potential political opponents or any potential political side, but rather, again, members of the public have observed things and they are making assumptions on his conduct, and to some degree the government is just really reflecting or catching up to certain public sentiments on this matter. What does the Law Association have to say about that? Because if the public has these questions, then is it out of bounds for members of the majority party to make statements on it? I understand that to some extent it is borderline improper, but given the topic, it's one of those catch-22 situations where, well, who else would speak on it? Because in this situation, the opposition ain't going to speak about it. So what is the government to do? It all depends on if it's legitimate. Because given the fact that you're speaking about someone having a potential bias or potentially not being objective, are we just supposed to leave that alone? Is the government supposed to just leave that alone? Also, in the defense of the Law Association, they're not actually speaking to the specifics of the situation. And usually, when anyone tries to defend something on a principled stance, you could tell to some extent, it's not 100% accurate, but you could tell exactly where they're coming from and what their motivation is by what they say or don't say with that principled defense. There are times when there's a situation where I understand it won't be popular when I say on principle, we should understand that this is not out of bounds. I understand that. But then I would have to follow up and express that, but I understand given the circumstances it's not popular. And I understand given the circumstances, like when I say innocent until proven guilty, it's not defending the criminals and hoping they get off scot-free, or just assuming that they're all good boys. The principle is innocent until proven guilty. But depending on the situation, I will give the caveat that I understand in this case, it's very difficult to reasonably even argue that they're innocent, but we still have to adhere to the principle. I would put that disclaimer in. Something like that would indicate that, yes, we acknowledge the situation, and we acknowledge the facts of the situation. And the facts of the situation might lead itself to be a very unpopular situation that we can't reasonably explain away. So we acknowledge that, but we'll just remind people about the principle. But the Law Association didn't necessarily, as far as I see, do that. Rather, as we've seen all too often, they didn't speak to the specifics, at least based on what's reported. And usually when a public figure doesn't speak to the specifics and just wants to put the principle with no context out there in the open, that's the time when we judge them by what they don't say. And then we have to ask the question, because again, it's not always true, But we have to ask the question, are you avoiding the specific issue at hand and you're trying to use a principal defense argument, but you can't actually defend the specifics of the situation, and you don't necessarily want to commit yourself to go on the record trying to defend the specifics of the situation, so it's better to just not speak about that at all. Because we don't want to expose ourselves as hypocrites on that level. But we kind of potentially are, because we're only speaking about this situation partially, not completely. Because if you fully believed that the senator did absolutely nothing wrong, then you should be able to voice an opinion or reasonable argument as to why. Or even if you don't fully believe it, but you still have a reasonable argument that you could offer, you could do that. But like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean what I'm saying could be a conclusion drawn or assumed out of the situation. So just be mindful of that. I'm just saying the possibility has been left open because it seems as though they themselves did not speak of the whole situation. And like I said, I understand the principal defense, but then in this situation, I would actually say that yes, on principle, we do have to be careful about our independent senators being attacked because their opinions are different to the government. Because that is valid. It is valid for them to have different opinions to the government. So on principle, we always have to be wary on that. But in this case, given the history of the senator in question and the pattern of decisions that has been made by the senator, I understand that there are members of the public who find his behavior questionable. And I actually cannot, because I do not know and have not thought of a significant reasonable defense, even if for the sake of being devil's advocate. And that's me agreeing with the Law Association on principle, but disagreeing with how they've handled the situation. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll go into today's Daily Review, some specific topics that get into the Prime Minister has revealed a bit of her immediate or current legislative agenda. Stuff is coming down the pipe. I am curious as to what the population will make of it. It's very curious. I myself don't know, but we'll hear more and we'll speak more about it after this. Stay tuned.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year, the Trade and Investment Convention, happening on July 17th to 19th at the Centre of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UETGR North Car Park all days, and NAMDevco on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Bal Roop Group and Bmobile Business.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world. Diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
And we're back here on Talking Point. This is the review on the Prime Minister. Well, they restarted, I guess, their Monday night forums, and the Prime Minister apparently had a lot to say with regards to, I wouldn't say this is her entire legislative agenda. I hope it won't be, because unfortunately there's a lot of legislation that needs to be fixed very, very, very quickly. But it seems as though the Prime Minister is looking to follow up on certain campaign promises and make changes that I have not necessarily, I don't know how the population feels about these things, and I am very curious. Now, of course, there is the stand your ground situation, and we'll get into that a little bit. But what caught my attention was what you see at the bottom of the screen right now. Raise the legal age of gambling and marijuana use to 25 years and over, and also increase the legal age for alcohol use to 21 years and older. And I think to some extent it's the second one that I find the most interesting with regards to the response to the population. Because we do live in a country where, let's just say, the legal age of drinking is something that is, for many households in this nation, seen more as a guideline than an actual hard law. And it was one of those things, I will never forget it, because I used to go to Tobago every July-August vacation, usually around similar times, because family would also be going up at around that time. And I can't remember if I was in Tobago in between July, August of the 2 years in question. But I just remember one year I went to Tobago, and, you know, everything is normal as I remember it. And then the next year, all of a sudden, there were signs about minors and not giving out cigarettes and alcohol to minors and stuff like that. I was like, whoa. And I thought, okay, maybe they're doing something about it, because I recognize, I remember seeing young people around the hotel with bottles of alcohol, and when there was an event at one of the other hotels, neighboring hotels, you know, so see a young man with a flask of alcohol on the beach, just by the way, kind of half drunk. And when I say young man, he was around my age, and I wasn't an adult yet. So I was like, oh, this is happening. And I just kind of left it alone, because what am I supposed to say? I'm not his parent. I don't really know him. He's just some random young person I saw on a beach. So I was like, oh, maybe they're actually going to do something about it. No, it seems more like our laws and the measures we have to enforce, quote unquote, laws about drinking and underage smoking, but of cigarettes, which the Prime Minister's statement didn't cover. Those seem to me were like to kind of ensure that the businesses don't get in trouble. And to be fair, I expect they would, for the most part, enforce those laws. You know, no average quick shop or bar is going to serve a minor, right? Of course, there'll be some minors who could kind of get away with it. I remember there was a guy in my Form 2 year who basically looked like 25 at 14. You know, not all minors are built the same. But for the most part, businesses, the everyday business doesn't do that. But of course, then there's the whole party culture, of which, you know, maybe there might be party cultures for people that includes customers under the age of 18, just saying. What would this law mean for that? Because now you're bumping up the drinking age. I mean, to some extent, there's essentially industries built around people who are partying. Yes, part of the market is underage, but it's also targeted to the 18 to 20-year-olds, 18 to 22-year-olds, and so on and so on. But then there's also the question about gambling, which I do find interesting, because the situation with gambling, and actually there's an article in Sunday's Newsday, I believe it should be in, and you could find it online. I was going to speak about it independent of the Prime Minister bringing this legislation. And the thing about gambling is, I do feel as though it's one of those hidden negatives in society. I don't know to what extent people really speak about it. Now, it was one of those things where I don't think my parents would have liked it if I went to a casino, but given my nature, that was never really my thing anyway. So they didn't really have to speak to me about things like that. I think they did, but it wasn't necessarily extensive, right? But I do know that the situation with gambling in the country is very, 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 well, to me it's weird. because of how destructive it is. A lot of people look at gambling and they think, oh, well, you know, casinos want these big money people and get these rich people to spend a lot of money. But it's not as though we have casinos like Atlantic City or Las Vegas, where it's not just the casino, but it's a whole hotel experience with a whole set of restaurants and a whole set of perks depending on how much money you're willing to lose in a casino, right? No, a lot of our casinos are little private member clubs that are literally just a casino in whatever spot, you know, whatever commercial area, whether it's in Movie Town, Woodbrook, what have you. And I understand, look, to some extent, I'm not saying casinos should be banned or outlawed or there's anything necessarily wrong with casinos, but unfortunately, I think it's how we as a people utilize casinos. A couple of our friends would say, yeah, you know, go on to a casino, maybe take $100, maybe have a drink, you know, give the wife some chips, give the, well, not the kids, but have a drink, stay for a little hour or two, not spending a lot of time there, going with a very small limit. All right, fine, that's fine. That's not necessarily what the businesses want to see. But I've seen stories personally where people go and do work in Tobago and they lose more money the first night there than they made in the whole trip. In the whole trip, all the money that they were paid to come up to do work, and all that money was gone in one night. More money than they earned was gone in one night. And essentially they were basically paying for the right to do work in Tobago at that point. And the article in Newsday actually spells out a similar situation where, and I'm not going to speak out the whole article, you should read all of it yourself, right? Where it goes into kind of, it touches on what I'm talking about. It's not rich people who are spending money, you know, left and right at casinos. Yes, there'll be some rich clients, but from what I understand, quite a lot of working class people spend too much of their income in casinos. And there's one example in the article that I'll point out. One gentleman, you know, basically, he got caught up with all of the hospitality that casinos gives you, because I believe they identify the fact that, look, we're not just about rich whales, we're also about whoever's willing to come in here and spend and lose money. And he pointed out the fact that, you know, I always thought I was a winner because free food and drinks. But then, you know, the reporter presses him and he admits, well, the most I ever lost in one night is 19,000. And then he goes on to say, no, actually 54,000 in one night. The 19,000, it was basically his Christmas bonus. And then he points out to, at times when he's short of money, he will beg for money by saying he needs to work on his vehicle, but he doesn't have the cash right now, he'll pay them back next month, only to then use that money to try to win it back in the casino. And I would bet you, not money, but I would bet you that more often than not, he does not succeed. So then, doesn't necessarily go to say if he pays his relatives back or not, but it does go to say, quote, I didn't feel guilty at all. I just needed the money quick. So I don't mind using other people's money to make back my money. And the addiction of gambling, I think, has caught too many of our population, including some of the immigrants. Some of the immigrants get caught up in it as well. I guess that need, it's not just for entertainment, for release, but to what extent is it an unhealthy relationship? Now, is it the responsibility of casinos? I don't know. But here's the thing, going back to the Prime Minister, raising the legal age of gambling, I don't know exactly what, do we have a problem with young people looking to gamble in casinos? I guess is the question. Because usually, that's not what I've seen or experienced, right? Now, I do have a few friends, they do spend their money in casinos, but generally speaking, at least to me, it seems as though they're not overdoing it. They're not putting themselves in financial difficulty, right? But I don't lime in casinos with them, so I don't know. I don't know how those things really work, how those things really go. I've been in casinos. But exactly what is this trying to solve? Because I would argue that casinos, to some extent, it is a social problem that we kind of have to try to fix maybe on the social side of the equation, not on the necessarily the business side. But then there's also illegal gambling and the like, where it's one thing to be a gambling addict and you lose money in a legal casino, and then they go through legal processes to, if necessarily, get you to pay off your debts. It's another thing to go into an underground gambling situation, and then less than legal means are used to come after you. But I don't know if all of these things are necessarily done by young people. So maybe it is perhaps, look, we're going to deal with alcohol, we're going to deal with weed, let's also just do this with gambling as well. Maybe to some extent it's trying to prevent a problem from even starting. But I do think with gambling, I would like to see more done on it with regards to exactly what safety nets do we have? What preventative measures do we have? Because it's one thing for a rich person to lose $54,000 in a night. But this person here in the article seems to be working class or middle class at best. I don't know about you, but 54,000, to lose 54,000 a night, that would more or less bury me. And if that's what's going on with too many of our working class people, where they get their paycheck and more or less after paying the bare minimum of their bills, their disposable income just goes to the casino, I don't know if that's healthy. I don't know if we should be encouraging it. I don't have any problem with casinos existing. The problem is, it's like alcohol. I don't have any problem with beer manufacturers or liquor manufacturers. But there needs to be some amount of intervention in order for it to be enjoyed responsibly, and I don't know if it is. Meanwhile, with the marijuana stuff, the Prime Minister did identify one of the things that Mr. San Fernando constantly speaks about is young people and marijuana. And again, this apparently is one of our campaign promises. The thing is, it might reduce the problem and maybe make it more manageable or controllable, but young people abused marijuana before it was legal. Let's be clear. It is what it is. To what extent will this really impact on underage smoking? What it might do is it will impact how visible it is more than the actual level. Is it out of control? One of the things that I hate is the fact that I don't think we necessarily have hard data on young people smoking marijuana and then underage people smoking marijuana. And that's the thing. To some extent, there's concerns about people who should not be smoking marijuana that are able to smoke it for whatever reason, under 18, or whatever. I don't know if the age limit is higher currently, but increasing the age limit now to 25, how is that going to be enforced? That's one of the other things. We changed the marijuana laws, but it seems as though, and don't ask me to go into all of the details because it's just a lot of minor things that have not been cleared up, but how to enforce what's supposed to be the current status quo seems to be not necessarily well thought out. So with the changes, part of what's going to be required before we could really assess is this being implemented well, is how the enforcement will be handled. Because it's one thing to say, oh, it's illegal, but if you can't enforce it, then is it really illegal? I mean, shucks, the police technically enforce the taxi situation. Is PH cars really illegal at this point? It is technically illegal. It's supposed to be illegal, but is it really illegal when we have government ministers acknowledging their existence? All right, let me see what we have next. Let's go on to the next story where, sticking with the Prime Minister, but the latest, well, yesterday I would say the latest political back and forth debates before the Prime Minister weighed in on the Law Association would have been her absence at the CARICOM meeting that has been going on, or has been going on. I'm not sure if it's over yet. So, of course, the Prime Minister decided not to go. Rather, she sent the Minister of Foreign Affairs and CARICOM Affairs, Sean Sobers, I don't know why I'm forgetting the minister's name all of a sudden. As well as, reportedly, the Minister of Homeland Security, Roger Alexander, because crime is one of the things on the agenda in this situation. But we haven't necessarily heard from Minister Alexander, assuming that he did go. But there have been criticisms leveled at the Prime Minister for her not attending, which I'm not too sure is completely fair right now. So first up, of course, we have former Minister of CARICOM Affairs and Foreign Affairs, Dr. Mary Brown. He basically made the criticism again. And I'll say this, I think it's similar to what I said with the Law Association, where he's basically speaking to the principle of, or maybe not principle, but what is the usual expectation or norms? Sending Ministers Sean Sobers and Roger Alexander in her stead does not compensate for her absence from these discussions with regional counterparts, particularly as Minister Sobers did not say one word at the recently held COFCOR, Council for Foreign and Community Relations meeting, which he participated in virtually. Right? He believes it sends all the wrong signals to regional partners. But it has come up that CARICOM heads from time to time may not be able to participate in person, so the Prime Minister is not a unique situation. Now, this is the defense by the Minister and the Office of the Prime Minister, right? I think the thing is, with regards to the Prime Minister going to CARICOM, well, there are a couple of other comments as well. I know David Abdullah also recently weighed in on the situation, and he also criticized the Prime Minister's absence, right? So, saying we in TNT must shift our trade and broader economic focus away from the US and Western Europe and begin to engage more meaningfully with Latin America. Actually, no, sorry. But basically, we're speaking about the economic challenges, right? And misplaced political focus. Now, part of the defense of the Prime Minister is the fact it was said she is needed here. There are things that she believes needs her attention. And I guess to some extent, Monday prepared to speak to the nation in their Monday night forum about the legislative agenda. That's not a small thing. But I think the main thing is, and I understand again, here comes David Abdullah, he's disappointed for her not to attend. Here comes the former Minister of CARICOM Affairs, Dr. Mary Brown. The thing is, what is the precedent of the government? Because if it was a case where the Prime Minister says, this is how I'm going to govern, things like this, it's not really what the precedent is. Because some American presidents might say, I'll let my Secretary of State deal with most of it. And some American presidents will do it in person. It all depends on a lot of things, including internal politics. Because perhaps the domestic agenda of the American president is more important than their international agenda. That's why would you fault a nation for saying, hey, I have situations I have to deal with. CARICOM is not predicated. CARICOM is not the community of Caribbean leaders. There's nothing, I believe, there's nothing in it that says, yes, there's heads of state, CARICOM heads of state and all of that. But for the most part, the community are the states that are members of CARICOM. The community is not the heads. And while, yes, there are times when it's more effective for the heads of states to meet and discuss things, because you could, depending on the situation, cut to the chase at least more than usual. It all depends on the individual agenda of each head of state. Now, again, David Lewis said misplaced political focus. I would argue that that's essentially a subjective debate. Situation like this, you could criticize more when you see a government act hypocritically. When they say, this is how we're going to do things, but then when they actually have to make decisions, they go the other direction. Particularly now, when we're not even 100 days in. If the Prime Minister does not want to deal with the international agenda because she has things on the national domestic slate that she wants to get through. And the stand your ground laws, which I didn't necessarily speak about, but she brought up last night, that has been one of the things that she has been kind of teasing and promising, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And if she wants to focus on that, fine. Also, to some extent, do you want, again, it also, you could debate on approach. Do you want the leader of your country to basically have to do everything? But if it was the case where the Prime Minister kind of set herself up to be the person to deal with the international stuff, and then she switched gears on a certain issue. Maybe she didn't want to speak about it. Maybe she didn't want to meet with certain people. Yeah, we could call her for that. But now this alien game, I don't necessarily know if it's fair to do so, because while Dr. Brown and Mr. Abdullah could speak about the principle of, well, no, she should go and must go is two different things. Now, granted, a lot of the defense will be with regards to what was the Prime Minister doing? Because if the Prime Minister, and this is where it's kind of a little bit rich, because I do remember when Guyana had an entry conference, the current government said, oh, no, we were going to go to the Middle East. But they didn't say it in a gracious way. So to what extent now does Dr. Brown have the political ammunition on CARICOM issues? Granted, it's not his fault, but it is what it is, right? He was from that administration, so he was, he's tied to those decisions, whether he made them or not. To what extent has the previous administration engaged with CARICOM in a perfect way? Did Dr. Heath Rowley always be the representative to go? Yes, he went, more often than not. I don't think he went all the time and didn't engage. And of course, the Guyana Entry Summit was not CARICOM event, but to some extent that's a major regional partner who is also a member of CARICOM. Less than 100 days in, there's stuff to be done. It would make the government's defense a lot stronger if they would actually show us what the Prime Minister is doing. Because again, if she's kind of not doing any work, and that's just the excuse, hey, you all go do it. I don't want to do it. I just want to stay home. This is one of the things about her working from home. It gives the appearance for those who want to criticize her, well, is she actually working? Because we don't see her doing anything. We see Khadija Amin when Khadija Amin goes out, although that was a couple of weeks ago now, so we can't necessarily just assume that's continuing without seeing her do more work further. But generally speaking, we have seen other ministers actually do things, right? That was one of the strengths of Jack Warner. The nation saw him go out and work as Minister of Works and Transport. Now, some people might want to say, hey, where has the Prime Minister been? Because at times she's not always in Parliament, etc., etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she's not working. But if she doesn't go to CARICOM and she's working from home, there are some in the public who might start to ask questions. And I'm not saying that the questions are valid or invalid. I'm just saying that this is one of the things where transparency works for you and nip two birds with one stone, showing, not necessarily telling, would help in this case. But generally speaking, I think to say that there's a principal argument that she should have gone, I don't know if it's really a principle or a strong principle. Maybe it's one of those guideline things. You should go as much as possible because all the heads of states are there and you all should meet and talk. But where it's a government in transition, if the UNC administration was in year 3, maybe there'd be more of a case that why didn't you go? Those questions could be asked. But given the fact that we're in month 3. All right. Before we open the phone lines, there's one last thing that I want to get through. Of course, there's a lot of talk every year around the time of the SAA exam and the SAA results when people talk about, oh my gosh, how bad it is. Look at the pressure our kids are under to do this exam, where the impression that we put on these young minds are that their entire future is determined in one day with one exam, and whether they're successful or not will be determined here, which is not true, but to some extent that is consciously or subconsciously, intentionally or intentionally, the message imparted on them, whether they themselves understand it or not. Here's the rub. That pressure technically doesn't stop after the essay results. Now, the time in between the exam and the results is probably the freest time in their lives because they have no worries. But now that the results are out, now there's the next steps. Actually having to go through the process to get to the future still has challenges and stressors. And I have a short clip from the Ministry of Education to speak about that, because we might be taking certain things for granted that might seem obvious, but really and truly, it's right that these things are pointed out so that we could be more aware. For more on the matter, it's time to cue this.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karina Henry Carrington. I'm Guidance Officer 2 Acting for Port of Spain Primary Schools. And today we'll be speaking a little about, well, not so much a little, but we'll be talking a bit about transition from primary into secondary school. Just in case your child wasn't assigned to the school of choice, right? I know sometimes parents will be disappointed, but I would just like them to respond with kindness and consideration. You know, what if it were me and this happened? How would I like to be treated by my parents? So that's the first thing I would like parents to do. Additionally, it's important for parents to register their children at the school they've been assigned, even if they are considering a transfer. I would say also be an involved parent. So don't think that, oh, they're in big school now. No, this is where you need to lead them and guide them even more, because there will be a whole host of challenges that will be coming their way. It's important for parents to collaborate and consult with students, with their teachers, the administrators, just check in and see, how is my son doing? How is my daughter doing at school? Assist your child with managing their time on devices. Start back going to bed earlier so that they can get up earlier to get ready for when September comes, they are ready to go out. Know that you are precious. Your parents love you. And I think if both of you all work along together, you collaborate, you can go to your assigned school. Once that is something that your parents agree with, you can go to your assigned school, do your very best, and you will excel. It's important to do your best wherever you are assigned. It's important for them to learn their form teacher's names, their subject teacher's name, know who their dean is, know your principal, your vice principal. It's very, very important to know who your guidance person is, your guidance officer or guidance counselor. Social workers, special education instructors, those are persons you can go to if ever you feel like something is wrong here, I'm not managing well, something is happening, I need help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Choose your friends wisely. Watch how people interact with others, how they treat others. And then you will know, okay, this is someone I would feel comfortable calling a friend. I know it's vacation time, but read a book or two while on vacation. Read a book or two. Make sure it's a book that you like. Respect your teachers and all adults on the compound at all times. Just in case you may think, but so Miss was disrespectful to me. That is no reason to disrespect that adult. Always treat them with respect, and then find a trusted adult that you can go to should it happen, that you can and say, well, Sir said this to me, or Miss said this to me, or Sir mistreated me in this way. List yourself in the school life. There are lots of activities at school, right? So you can choose which type of sporting activity you want to join, what club you want to be part of. Get involved in school life. And parents, it would require a sacrifice of your time. But when your children get involved in school in positive ways, then they end up enjoying school a little more. It's not just about the academic, because we're looking at holistically developing our children so we could have well-rounded adults, well-rounded citizens of our Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Please remember, for all our students, you were meant for greatness. It doesn't matter what it may seem like right now. If you were not assigned to the school you wanted, or you didn't get your first choice, but you got your second choice, remember you were meant for greatness, and nothing can stop that.
By all practical measures, I am an introvert, and as an introvert, I don't think I was well equipped to deal with the transition, and I wouldn't necessarily tell anybody about it, speak about it, ask questions about it. So one of the things there is to encourage your child to ask for help, to say what their fears are or what their doubts are. I myself, it wasn't that I was discouraged not to ask. I myself was so introverted, despite how I came off, whatever social capacity and conversational preferences I came off having. I myself was always reluctant as a person to communicate those things. Communicate those things in class to a teacher, communicate those things. First of all, I don't think going to school that I ever had a guidance counselor or anything of the sort. Now, I do know that they existed in schools at the time. I don't know if, certain schools just didn't have them, right? So I didn't necessarily know who to speak to for what or what to do. And it's just one of those things where parents, you yourselves aren't necessarily going to automatically know what to do or how to identify whatever your child is going through, if they're adjusting easily, if they're not adjusting easily. I wouldn't say I didn't adjust easily, but there was a lot of psychological hurdles. I knew before going to secondary school that, hey, this was a jump. Like, I knew that at 11 that this is going to be not like what I was accustomed to. And that and all was a little bit of a pressure on me. And of course, I think all students kind of, if either they knew it or they subconsciously knew it, because everybody was kind of, all tight and didn't want to step out of place at all, and everybody was amicable. And then, once you get into like Form 2, it is what it is by that point. And then people's personalities, they either show themselves or they change because of whatever influences affect their development, whether positive or negative. But there was a lot that was said there in the video with regards to students, one, asking for help, two, parents being there every step of the way. And I think three, also utilizing the 2-month vacation, not to just say, be free, but no, don't necessarily let them have too bad of a habits during the holidays. Encouraging your child to read. One of the things that I picked up for myself, although it started because I believe my father gave me a novel. I don't know how where he got the novel. I think it was a Star Wars novel. Just happened to give it to me. I might have been 11 at the time, now transitioning to secondary school. That, I think, might have been the first book of that style, that length, that I read through on my own. Now, I was a reader, but it was more like reference books at that point, right? And not necessarily to that extent. But reading a novel does help with things like vocabulary and understanding expressions and understanding social, cultural things, certain human behavior, certain traits. It expands your horizons in a way, even if it's science fiction, because then it exposes you to ethical dilemmas, it exposes you to various concepts of politics and various concepts of human behavior and how to protect, well, not necessarily that it's always the best guy, but the responses to certain things, etc., etc. It just opens up your mind. So I believe when she says read a book or two, it doesn't have to be some kind of textbook. But to some extent, at least back when I was doing English literature, you read books. Like the classics like Shane, A Tale of Two Cities, The Silver Sword, etc., etc. Those were the books on some of them on my Form 1 list. So I think one of the key things is, especially now when you have the internet, now when the challenges of parenting are greater than when I was 11 going to 12 in Form 1, being more involved in your child's school life and the transition to secondary school, it's a balancing act, but you could get away with, especially with being more involved now, they're still young. Obviously, when they're 16, they might not want you around all the time, you know, because parents aren't cool. But don't think that the exam is over and now you have to worry about Form 5. No, you have to worry about Form 1. Because the norms, the practices, the precedents, the development starts or continues now. But now is actually a good time where you have a chance where the child could reset, where you could start to, if the expectations on the child was unreasonable, unrealistic, unfair, or whatever, or it could be self-imposed expectations, now they could be reset. Now new skills, new practices, new habits could be formed now because it's a new environment with new demands. You know, this is the time when a child could catch up in other ways. But it would help for the parent to be there to try to guide. The key point to some extent is guide. You can't force them to do things. But guide them, encourage them to make friendships, identify good friends, point out where you think maybe this person might not be a good friend, and which is all the things that the speaker said, as well as extracurriculars to be more holistic in development. It might seem obvious when she says it, but I'm pretty sure these are things that not a lot of parents look at or think about, because there's so many things that you have to think about anyway in a lot of cases. Not in all. So it is what it is. Hopefully they have enough of the right people to guide you for those young people who really have doubts. Professionals, parents could only know so much, so some of it you need the professionals. It would be more efficient, more effective. Hopefully, don't be afraid to reach out to the people in your school. If you don't have a guidance counselor handy, maybe a form teacher. You know, of course, that all depends on who you have. Now, there's more that can be said on this topic, but I am not a professional educator, no psychologist, no counselor, so I'll leave it alone. We open up the phone lines. You could call in and have your say. Now's the time to contribute. And as always, to start the conversation rolling, we have Mr. Digger Martin on the line. Good morning, caller, you on the air. Caller, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Small.
Morning, morning.
Excellent topic, and I have my take on it. And let me tell you, first thing I want, because they say it's about, what, 40, 50% got under 50?
More like 30, I think.
Right.
6,000 out of 17 plus, so a
right.
third.
So
34%, somewhere around there.
We have an issue, and we have a major issue, and that goes back to the basic literacy and numeracy skills. It is grounded in our education system. Now, you're seeing the pressures of SE into secondary. One of the biggest mistake the President father-in-law made, the Minister of Education, is removing the CAC, the Continuous Assessment Component. That continuous assessment component was filling the gap. Mm-hmm. Because what it did, it gave you an inside look of what you're going to do in Form 1. It told you about the VAPA. It told you about the science. It told you about the social studies, apart from the reading and writing and the comprehension skill. That is where the students got a taste of what science is all about, what social studies is all about. And that component forced parents to work side by side with the students. That created another bonding with parents, because because it was a new area of the education system that forced teachers to understand that new curricula, because they put pressure on the system and they tell Garcia to run with it, and tutor was part of that too. Tutor and the NPTA said it was too much pressure. But as a parent, because I went through it, and I understood where it is, because the child, my trainer had an idea where they wanted to go. So you made the effort. No. The former Minister of Education, I think she has to start zipping them out. A lot of the people in the CARICOM basically publishes the success of that 10, 11-year-old. They don't call it essay, they call it some other thing, the national test or something like that. You have to tell people or show people, based on meritocracy, where you are going, who are those people excelling. You use that, the people who we are questionable and we saying they are failing. Let us see the demographics of where it is. Don't shy away from the problem. If you know you have a problem, fix it. And I am sure a lot of that going to be north of the lighthouse. And if they are serious, because you have to understand, we had a government has been in office for how much? 75% of our independence. The collective net result of that education system and what they have been put in is a direct result of what we get in. No matter how you throw the dice, you have to put the blame where it is. So why are you want to hide the successful students? They work hard, the parents do all kind of things, take them to lessons. And a lot of people say the lessons put pressures on parents. Yes, to move around the physical pressure, but the joy of bonding with a child, sitting down on evenings and going through the work, helping them with their homework, has a lot to do with it. And if you don't come back to your household, your parents, then what you expect from the child? If you don't discipline them, and disciplining is not beating them with a stick, discipline is telling me, hey fella, you can't watch this show now. I want to see you finish your homework. When you finish your homework, go on, turn on the TV and watch your show and go to your bed. Because in the morning, you want them to be fresh. You want them have a little nice breakfast. You cut back significantly on the dietary thing for school feeding. All of these things contribute. And I blaming it on, a lot of the blame has to go to the PTA, who has never really understood or really only interested in the subvention the government given them. And the tutor, where the tutor came out of, that was out of the PNM. They say it's a party group, but that born out of a PNM former Minister Garcia. He was the first thing. What that was for, and what was the reason for that? That's to get a stronghold of a particular sector of the population to get votes. They were interested in really education. How can 10 years, you have been government in 10 years, and you have 106 schools not functional, the physical infrastructure, and then you send them home and you don't want them to give them laptops and things like that. I mean to say, you can't blame, and I feel sorry for a lot of those children, but those children can be easily helped if we put the resources, we train the teachers, we give them the tools, and they will work. But they have to make sure parents have to contribute as significant. You can't let your teachers be your parents. I'm going to have a nice morning.
Well, that's a whole other kind of fish. You can't let your teachers be your parents. I wouldn't necessarily like to comment on that. There's a lot to unpack there. Tutor, at times, yes, it's been involved in politics. I do think the current president at least is doing a better job at not necessarily being political with a political agenda, right? But we have to wait and see how that goes on, because I do think the labor side of our education system has its issues, like a lot of the public service. I won't go into that, right? I'll agree with you on the continuous assessment. I didn't like it as a student, but in part that was because I didn't know how to do schoolwork as a student. I'll be very blunt, right? I was able to kind of fake my way through because I was smart enough, but to say that I was able to properly do work as a student and understand what I was doing, it's weird for me to say. I wasn't as bad as some students, but I really didn't really know what I was doing. I was just bright enough to get by without having to commit myself to do too much work. But that, of course, didn't work once you got to certain levels. You know, it started to break down at the A-level, you know, tier. And then once you get into university, well, you're kind of forced into continuous assessment. And things are a bit more serious. But luckily, my second stint in tertiary education was a lot better than my first stint, right? But that's just one of the things. And partially, it started from Form 1. So because in primary school, I was more than capable of getting by easy, from Form 1 and all, some of the stress of the situations of just being unsure and not knowing who to go to. So, and I'm not showing any signs of distress. So it's not like people ignored me, right? It was what it was. But of course, it's a small problem. It's a very, very minor problem in Form 1. Once it gets to like Form 5, Form 6, then it gets a lot more serious. But it's still manageable, right? But not everybody is in that same situation. To some extent, there was a little bit of luck involved because when I say that I was flying blind, you know, I was able to just figure out just enough to not, you know, fall on my face. We have a call on WhatsApp, and we have some comments. We'll get to the comments later, but the call on WhatsApp first. Good morning, caller, you're on here.
Yes, Sean, good morning again.
Morning.
Caller from Arima.
Morning.
All right, so in Trinidad and Tobago, the police service is a doctor, a nurse, an advisor, dealing with traffic, dealing with crime, and dealing with all of these things. And the police service definitely needs assistance from the legislature. Now, last night, the Prime Minister indicated the rise of the drinking age and the use of marijuana age.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two denominations, 21 and 25.
Yeah.
So what does the police do? You see somebody in Arapita Avenue in the night on a Friday, you stop all of them and ask them the age. They simply have to do is make sure that the population over the age of 13 or 14 have an ID card with them. So what does St. James do on a Friday night? Mm-hmm. Carry all these young fellows and young ladies to the station and try to assess, because they are not obligated by law to give the police the age and not even to give the police their names. I will listen off here. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. So that's the thing. To make the changes, the scenarios that you point to, you know, might come to pass. And then do we put it in law that they have to at least identify themselves? Because to some extent, this is one of the tricky parts. You don't have to identify yourself, but if you're suspected to be someone who is not of age and are drinking in a public space, can the police let that go or not intervene? And for them to intervene, they can't just assume that you're a minor. No, you have to be given the right to identify yourself as an adult. But that's asking of, you know, you to identify yourself, right? Because you just saying you're an adult ain't enough, so then you have to give your ID. But that basically is identifying yourself, which you're not technically, you know, compelled to do. But in this case, shouldn't you? And raising the drinking age might actually increase the amount of situations where this will come up. Let's put it that way. Because now you're looking at 21 and under, not 18 and under. So there's more people in that age range that might go out on the Avenue St. James to drink. And the police now might say, hey, we need to check all these people. But there's a flip side to that. I'll get to the flip side. We'll take another Rima on the line. Good morning, caller, you're on here.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
I want to talk about this independent senator issue.
Uh-huh.
Because who appoints these senators? Isn't it the president?
Yes.
And who appoints the president? Isn't it the party in power?
Well, the current president was appointed by the previous administration. When her term is over, then the new president will be appointed by the party in power.
The president.
Yeah.
Right. So if we really want true democracy, the president should be elected by the people.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at separation of powers, you say you have president, you have prime minister, you have chief justice. The president carries a title, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. When last have we seen the president in any National Security Council meeting? She has absolutely no contribution there at all. So if we truly want independent senators, I believe the president should be elected. Now, with the prime minister, I'm watching her and I really like how she looking. So I could understand why she didn't travel and go to this CARICOM heads of government meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you was watching her last night, not every minute, but she had to stop and cough. Remember, she over 70,
yeah,
and she's diabetic and she had a cold. So with that, I would understand why she wouldn't want to go to a CARICOM heads of government meeting after having such a heavy schedule last week. And the last thing I want to say, I saw her do something last week. And I want you, anybody in the population, to tell me when last have they seen this. I saw her stop in the parade and go and take out pictures with some school children on the side of the road. When last have we ever seen any one of our leaders do that?
Mm.
And mind you, I'm not a UNC supporter, nor am I a PNM supporter, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I am just an independent, civic-minded citizens. And then this man who talking about education and the component he want to put in. As a teacher here, we're going on with the system. This is not a one-size-fits-all. So the psychomotor development of these children in these pro-junior sex, what they call in secondary now, like Curep and Arangwes, those children are not capable of handling 8 subjects, which is read only. No, they have to get more vocational things. I believe they should be doing maths, English, social studies, home ec, and 4 trades of your choice. Yeah. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, caller. Thanks, caller. First thing, I just want to expand on the last thing caller said. It's not that we're saying these students are academically incapable because of, they are just not bright. I'm sure a lot of people want to say that, but I do believe really and truly it comes down to what were the expectations and resources from the starting point, and then what are they going forward, all throughout your time in school. And a lot of it comes down to the expectations and the exposure. If your worldview as obviously a 5-year-old is not gonna know a lot about the world, but the more exposure even little children have to just the world, whether it is going to farms or going, taking them out to see something, buying various different books, letting them see different documentaries, taking them to the beach, letting them travel, letting them meet new people, right? Just exposure to things. And then the expectations behind the students on, okay, I have high expectations for you because I know you can. Why can't you? Because of what area you're living in, because of what race you are. Why does that have anything to do with it? All the things come into play. But unfortunately, once you get to the secondary school level, if you're behind in primary school, then it's hard to catch up, even in secondary school. Now, there's chances for you to catch up, but I don't know if the system is built for that. It goes back to what the caller also was mentioning. He was indirectly stating it's a one-size-fits-all situation, and it doesn't work. And part of where the one-size-fits-all situation doesn't work is we don't really have a lot of good measures in place to help students to catch up. And once you fall behind too far, it's almost like if you're always behind, unless you really put in a lot of work. But it will reach the point where the amount of work a student will have to put in is to such a degree that it could impact their development, because at the end of the day, rest and relaxation and playtime is not only part of helping you with, developing yourself socially with your peers outside of school work, but also helping you recharge so you have the mental and emotional energy to face the next day. Professional people, working adults, you need days off, not just to deal with errands, but also to try to recharge and relax so you don't burn yourself out. I have a friend that burned himself out, went to the hospital, overworked. And students are not immune to that, especially if they're involved in extracurriculars and you want them to be more rounded and stuff like that. Like, there's only so many hours in a day, even for students. And I do think that the number of teaching hours isn't necessarily a problem, but how effectively they're used, and especially if it's a one-size-fits-all system, then basically the size is you need to be at this pace, on this course, moving in this direction, no extra breaks, no allowances, just keep going. So any deviation, and then the benefits of the system start to fall apart. Continuous assessment, I think, is part of it in the sense of, generally speaking, it gets away from we need to pass the exam. So you're doing accounts, you have the accounts exam at the end of the term. You have the math exam at the end of the term. It gets you away from that, right? I think students don't necessarily like it because there's more, I have this assessment, that assessment, and it's more ongoing. But to some extent, it kind of, it's a better system I think, to assess them throughout the year, and it allows you greater opportunities on the assessment because now you're not limited to just an exam. You could have certain projects and certain other things to try to help to put it all together, make it more dynamic, make it more diverse in how you're assessing them, right? But again, it all depends. It still doesn't necessarily, you could still fall in the trap of a one-size-fits-all system. Now, if the Prime Minister is sick, I can understand it's not so simple for government to say, well, the head of state is sick, so they're not doing this, that, or the other, right? That could be a thing. But given our age, it's one of the things that I'm worried about too, that the task in front of us is so large, it might age her faster than is normal. Let's put it that way. That she'll come out of the job, depending on if she really works hard to try to improve things. First of all, she could wear herself out for very incremental changes, because that's just the nature of governance and public bureaucracy. It's very hard to make a lot of decisive sweeping changes that will stick. It's very hard, and it takes a lot of work. And to what extent should we expect her to be able to fix everything? As much as they're trying to say they'll do it, I don't think that's reasonable. Not everything is going to be fixed in one term. We have to kind of have reasonable expectations from the start. The Prime Minister could almost kill herself and legitimately get a lot done. It's still not going to be enough to fix everything. So now, with regards to the president and independent senators, here's the thing. On principle, electing the president is probably the best thing to do, because once you get to appointing, somebody has to do the appointing. And then you say, well, we'll get somebody independent to appoint the independents. Well, then who's going to appoint the independent appointer? And you just continue up the chain until you have to select somebody, and it can't be the opposition. That's not practical. So it's going to either be the government appoints or they're elected. Here's the key. On a practical level, if the president is elected at the same time as the general elections, what's going to happen is whoever wins the general elections, that party is going to have the president as well. I don't know if that's a good thing all the time, just for it to be like that automatically by default. But if you see the appointment of presidents is not at the same time the government changes over, right? If we do it, that essentially in the third year of an administration, that's when we have presidential elections. So it's not at the same time. Then it's potentially a check and balance on the government. Also, the monarchy for the UK government is involved with their national security apparatus, not necessarily their policing. So, to what extent are we going to really determined that this should be a thing. That's one of the funny things about national security in the country. What we view as national security at the end of the day is really domestic policing, right? We don't really have a military. That's where the king would be involved. In fact, as the head of state of Canada, I believe they still are, if Canada wants to go to war, technically the King of England has to declare that war for them legally, right? It's just the process. Now, of course, back in World War II, the British monarchy was far more involved, but it was still technically, to some extent, ceremonial, right? Because ultimately speaking, Churchill was involved, the prime minister, not the king or the queen at the time. But there's still certain rules, and they're still briefed, and they're still informed. Now, should our president be more involved? Maybe, but then again, the precedent of the Westminster system is national defense, and we don't, in light of military threats, not in light of transnational crime. But then again, I don't know what the president is briefed on with regards to the government. We know that the prime minister meets with the queen. Does our prime minister regularly meet with the president and brief the president on everything? I don't know. But with regards to the independence of the president, I do think, yes, at this point, elections might be the easiest solution, but not at the same time as the general. Because again, whatever the majority party is, it'll just win everything at that point in time, because that's how we do things here, right? But if we do like how the Americans have their midterms, if we kind of split it, then the sentiment, the public will have a chance to independently assess each one. That comes with its cons now, because if every different arm of the state is under different political parties, then it might be harder to get things done. So there's pros and cons to this, but I think I rather we err on the side of, if the president is of a different political party, it is what it is. Because the goal of it is to be more of a check on the government. Most of the executive power is in cabinet and the prime minister anyway. So this shouldn't be that big of a loss to the current administration if it's not their appointee. Is it bad if the independent senators are more often not against the government? To some extent, yes. It all depends, but that will now be a reflection of who we elect as president, as opposed to we're just riding whatever the political bandwagon is at the time of general. Okay, we have some comments to get through before we close out the show. Starting with the first one. All the liquor and gambling revision will do is to give police more power to harass people. What will happen during Carnival? The jails will be full. Here's the thing though. There's already stuff that goes on your radar with underage drinking and underage smoking. So I'm not entirely sure that it will give the police more power, yes. But we're not talking like they could harass 30-year-olds. I mean, technically speaking, if they wanted to harass a 30-year-old and say, how old are you, and harass you, they probably could do it now, because 18 to 21 for drinking ain't that big of a jump. With regards to smoking, let's just say enforcement with regards to smoking marijuana has not been well thought out. I anticipate even less of a change with regards to that situation. Gambling, I don't know. Because again, I don't know if there's a specific issue with younger people and gambling. I know that there's an issue with working class people, but most of the people who I've seen have gambling problems are older, to be honest. So I don't know to what extent that's applicable with regards to younger people. So all that I'm left with is drinking, which I know is a thing, but I also know it's a thing that society kind of does this. Oh, what? They're drinking? What I don't know can't hurt me. So it is what it is. Will it really change the police? At this point in time, I think they have so much on their plate. If they see it, if it's obvious, they will probably act on it. Outside of that, I don't know. Next comment, quick. Any PM or president has the right to decide if national issues should take precedence over attending a regional international conference. Presently, both President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin are not attending the very important BRICS conference in Brazil. I think in part, BRICS is not CARICOM. Believe it or not, I actually think CARICOM as a community, there are stronger ties with regards to CARICOM than with BRICS. In part because some of the BRICS members are their own biggest competition for very specific niche markets, a la India and China with regards to wanting to be major manufacturers of certain things like electronics and pharmaceuticals and what have you. But then also militarily, India and China are essentially two of each other's biggest or bigger threats. I would say for India, China is one of their bigger threats. For China, India is a threat, but they also have to look at South Korea, America, Japan, Taiwan, Australia. They're probably looking more east. But the threat of India blocking, there's a strait there in between Indonesia, and essentially all traffic, all goods coming from the western side of the world, oil coming from the Middle East essentially goes around Asia. But going around the southern side of Australia, New Zealand is not that practical. So blocking access to the waterways, through Indonesia is apparently that much of a strategic concern for China, that they look at the Indian Navy and say, hey, we don't want this vulnerability there. But one would think that if they're friends, they don't have to worry about that as much. The reason why India and not necessarily America is because India's Navy operates in Indian Ocean. So they could easily block access to cargo traffic, oil container traffic, utilizing those routes to China. So BRICS is not, CARICOM, because of the specifics of how CARICOM is made up compared to BRICS, I would argue CARICOM is a tighter existence, except to some extent, like on paper, we're supposed to be closer than BRICS, but in actual reality, I don't know if we are, with regards to trade deals and the like. It is what it is. But that is a good point, though. Saying a lot to come back to, that is a good point. BRICS without China and Russia, that's two of the three big players. I don't think Brazil is quite on that level. South Africa definitely is not. And all of the other members, all of the other countries they might be looking to add wouldn't be on the level, especially China. Especially China. And this could also be showing, the Indian Prime Minister showing we have our international agenda. It probably is competing with China's international agenda. Just saying. Belt and Road did not include other major players as partners. We do have let's go to the next comment. This one, I don't know if I could give you a good answer to this. With regards to Bishop Annesley charging parents a registration fee of $1,200 per student. I'll be honest, I'm not that well versed with the education system as to what should or should not be. But I do remember things like this, depending on the specifics, were questionable, right? Because secondary school education is supposed to be free. But you would probably need to speak to the PTA. I know one of the callers does not necessarily like the PTA, but speak to the PTA. If the school has a local PTA, maybe, or the national PTA, or to some extent, maybe get some advice from the Ministry of Education with regards to school registration. Because there are specifics to this on, I believe, what could or could not be asked. It's just one of those things where schools are trying to make up budgetary shortfalls by putting so many burden on the parents when school is supposed to be free. But I hesitate to say, to give you a decisive opinion on the matter because it's not something that's within my wheelhouse. So look into it. The flip side is, to some extent, it could just be the school is going about trying to meet its needs the wrong way. And the reason why you need to consider the fact that the school needs it, not saying that they have a right to do so or they should do it this way, but if your child is going to the school and they have a shortfall, it's just one of those things where either, you got to consider trying to get your child transferred out or tell the school, look, you have to go about this a better way and we'll try and support you. Because a lot of prestige schools, they depend on the alumni and the parents to help support the school. That's just the reality of the situation. But doing it this way with a registration fee where you're compelled, that might be a step too far. There's a last comment to take. I haven't read it yet myself, so we'll read it together. Government gambling, aka National Lottery, is pure thievery. Well, the house always wins, right? And there are some people, their gambling addiction is with the National Lottery. It just all depends on how much money you spend on it. If you want to buy a lotto ticket every day and that's what you're limited to, I guess that's fine. If you buy dozens and hundreds of lotto tickets a day, the odds are still technically against you. But at that point, and that's where it comes with responsibility. If you and your lady friend, you and your wife, you and your girlfriend, you and your husband, you and your family, whatever, whoever is of legal age, go to a casino, everybody has like maybe $100, $200. Because when you go to a club, you could spend around the same amount of money just buying drinks if you go to a bar or club, right? Now, if you go to a casino, they might offer certain things for free. You know, you're spending money on the slots. You have to understand, you're not necessarily going to get the most expensive, the best quality of everything for free, right? But you just go, you take the little hospitality that they provide, you spend a little bit of money, you spend 1, maybe 2 hours, and you're out. With regards to lotto, you buy your one lotto ticket, and you're cool, and you chill with that, fine. You know, I can't fault people that. But if you go overboard, and you probably can trace any dragon, to borrow a phrase of opium abusers, then that could be a problem. Now, the thing with state-sponsored gambling, it is a way to make money. But I think it's just one of those things where, again, what can we put in place on the social side in order to prevent people from taking it too far, from going to extreme with the behavior to the point where it's unhealthy, right? To foster proper expectations and a proper mindset on how to interact with these things, to utilize these things for entertainment, because they have people who vehemently believe I'm going to make money. So they're chasing that dream and they're throwing good money after bad, and the house always wins, and you're not guaranteed to win. And it's the same thing for play away, lotto, etc., etc. You're not guaranteed to win. So if you chase that win, it probably won't be worth it. You could probably go your whole life wasting money. You're not guaranteed to win ever. All right, out of time, so we leave that there. Thanks to all the commenters. Thanks to all of the callers. The situation with the education system, I think, is far more expansive, far more complex, and honestly deserves far more conversations on far more levels than we could do in one episode on Talking Point. But not just for one show to handle. I would encourage everyone to have those conversations on your own, seek out information, ask people who you know it might be involved in the education system, go online, look up. I brought the model of Finland, and maybe we could re-examine that once again, or present that to the public once again. But, I think it needs to become a national conversation so that the politicians might maybe prioritize it differently and maybe be encouraged or incentivized to take a different approach to the situation. To some extent, while I don't necessarily want to agree that the PNM of however many years from independence caused this damage over a long period of time, because each administration was different, ultimately speaking, to some extent, the philosophies and the precedents were built upon each other, and there is at least some truth to that in this case especially. And we got what we got. But it's also a situation that a lot of countries and jurisdictions are experiencing, where the systems that were fine when we were this big are no longer fine. Let me just do this differently. When we were this big are no longer fine when we're this big, because the complexities compound themselves as we grow, as the population size increases, and also as new technologies, new methods, and new demands and more competition causes more stress on the system. With that said, have a good day, stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other, and never forget, it's nice to be nice. Be nice to your child's teachers, even if they're not worth anything, because you're not really going to help them if you want to have an argument with the teacher, and maybe then you do need to do the transfer, or maybe you do need to speak to the principal, but still be nice about it if you want people to help you and help your child. Just saying, nice people tend to get more results. Not saying to be weak, and not saying to be tolerant of poor behavior on behalf of service providers, but be nice about it, even while you complain, and you might get a better result. We'll see each other tomorrow. Gonna speak about something big, pharmaceutical topic. I believe that's on Karen's plate. Hopefully nothing has come up to derail that. But the pharmaceuticals in this country, that's tomorrow with Carnes Teixeira. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year, the Trade and Investment Convention, happening on July 17th to 19th at the Center of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UE TGR North Car Park all days, and NAM Devco on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Bal Roop Group and Bmobile Business.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along